Does your life sometimes feel like a wild obstacle course with unforeseen changes and challenges at every turn? If you've encountered unexpected shifts in your relationships, work life, finances, or health, you know how daunting and stressful they can be. Yet when we learn to embrace the hurdles life brings us, we can use them to shape our stories and path in life. Today, I am joined by a fabulous family medicine and public health physician and author who will offer her wit and wisdom on making meaning and growth out of the changes life brings our way. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real life question. Since I was a kid, I envisioned my life a sort of white picket fence plan with a husband, 2 kids, and a dog. I know it's a stereotype, but it's what I always dreamed I'd have. I'm in my late 30s and divorced from the man I thought was my life partner. I've made it through 2 major health challenges, cancer and major injuries from a car crash. I feel sad a lot because life's passing me by and it seems my dreams won't come true. I feel stuck. Do you have any suggestions to help me find hope? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are imperfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Please note, as this episode contains sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need more information, please see the special links in the show notes. Today, I am joined by a tremendous special guest, Dr. Rebecca N. Thompson, family medicine and public health physician and author of the fabulous book, Held Together, a shared memoir of medicine, motherhood, and imperfect love. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Thompson. It's such a joy to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thanks so much for this opportunity.
It's such a pleasure to have you. So before we launch into this really important topic, it's just so rich and deep. Could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you, you?
Yes, thank you. Well, I would say that some of the most visible identities that define me are relational, like doctor, mother, partner, friend, right? That's not in any priority order, of course, because the emphasis on any one of those roles will change based on what I'm focusing on in the moment. And all of those parts exist in me in some way that's woven together into these intricate and constantly shifting patterns. But I think more importantly, at the core of this, at the core of all these relationships that I value because of who I am, I would say that my most defining characteristics are curiosity and a deep fascination with the connections between things.
What a beautiful backdrop, and the curiosity piece and looking for those connections.
Yeah, thank
That's
you.
such a beautiful way of being in the world. And I think those qualities are among my favorites.
Yes, I think it ties into your work so much too, because, a really central part of curiosity means that I love to learn. I've always loved to read, and you as an author, to value books and reading and learning, and feel like it just opens up the world for us to learn anything we're curious about, and especially as kids, right, when every idea is new. And I will say, and I think this is an important part of that answer to who I am, is sort of what I'm drawn to because of reading and loving to learn and that curiosity. Like you, I'm drawn to things that other people typically consider difficult or painful or uncomfortable in some way. to talk about, and in everything from professional life to friendships to parenthood. So,
Thank you for sharing that. And you made me think of that Mr. Rogers quote about, anything that's human is mentionable and anything that is
mm,
mentionable is then manageable. And
yeah.
when we learn to talk, when we learn to be curious, and most of all, when we learn to listen,
Hmm.
hold space for other people, we become these receptacles.
Hmm. Oh my goodness, that's exactly it. I mean, that is the origin of the book that I know we'll talk about later. But as I've gained more professional experience and more life experience over the years, I feel like that curiosity is what has just grown into wanting to take an active role in sharing stories that are too often dismissed or ignored or said are thought to be not important enough to talk about. And we don't need to shy away from those. We need to shine a light on them and listen more deeply. And that is where we find those connections, where we find those patterns, the moments in ordinary people's lives that show us what we have in common, right? That's the heart of it.
Absolutely. And sometimes, even if we can't find something that we have in common with someone, we can find threads
Mm,
that are
mhm,
so different from who we
mhm,
are. And those threads, if we're open to it, can be so alluring,
mhm,
interesting,
mm,
challenging if we don't
mhm,
judge them as right or wrong or good or bad. And so,
mhm,
absolutely, I think that's, and that you also already brought up a piece. I was thinking, I was collaborating on my next newsletter,
mhm.
and the piece that I was really focusing on highlighting in there was that piece of in gatherings, whether it's a holiday gathering or just two friends or, a group of people, what is that gift that you can bring to that gathering? And we often think of giving
Yeah.
presents or bringing food. But if we bring
Mhm,
that gift of presence, just being
mhm,
present, not that we have to be a dumping ground for other people,
mhm.
but in our very disconnected world, one
Yeah.
of the best gifts we can give is 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an
Mhm.
hour of our soul time, that space for
Yes.
listening.
Yes, showing up for other people and learning those more nuanced stories that are behind the visible identities that we're so used to using to define ourselves. What do they really care about and what has really shaped them?
Yes, and listening in a world where there's so much judgment,
Mhm.
so much profound judgment from all
Yes.
spaces, that if we can be in that non-judgmental space, doesn't mean we have to agree with what's being said, but if we can be in a space of not
Mhm.
judging, that holding
Mhm.
space. So,
Or at least receiving it, right?
receiving it,
Knowing
yeah.
that we, again, aren't perfect, so of course we will have our judgments, but we can still be a safe space for people to really show what they care about and who they are.
Mhm. And even when judgments arise, I learned this
Mhm.
way back when I was in doctoral school, that is, every researcher has a bias. Every researcher has a bias. But if you can learn to either acknowledge the bias and be
Right,
that just simple and straightforward with it, or
right.
ideally bracket the bias, put it
Mm.
over to the side so you're acknowledging it. And then by putting it to the side, you then become a more complete safe space. And I know in my work every
Mm.
day, I have to take care before every session, make sure that I am completely clear, or as clear as an imperfect human can be, so that anything that is on in my world is not part of that session. So
Mm.
now your book, for those listeners, if you aren't watching on YouTube or some other visual platform, you might not see, or likely don't see, Dr. Thompson's book behind us. And I do have to say it's a beautiful cover. But the reason I'm
Thank
segueing
you.
into your book right now, it's called Held Together, a shared memoir of medicine, motherhood, and imperfect love. And clearly, imperfect love, we're already united in that piece. But from your work, you really brought together, which this will take us to the listener's question. You brought together all of these stories of people's whose lives had unexpected turns,
Mhm, mhm,
these shifts one way or another. health challenges, all of
Mhm.
these issues that could capsize the boat of their lives if they didn't learn in some way to take those challenges and turn them into opportunities for growth, learning, connection. So, could
Mhm.
you tell us a little bit before we really dive into the listener's question? What drew you to write this book? Because it is very, very warm, very connective
Mhm.
in nature.
Thank you. The origin of this, of course, going back into the stories I'm interested in, as I mentioned earlier, just those deeper stories, the connections, that's always been there if I look back. But the actual events that caused me to go down this path, I was finishing up my medical training, finishing up residency. And that was when my husband and I decided pretty good time to think about starting a family. And we quickly went through a series of very complicated pregnancy issues, losses. And I just felt, in spite of all my medical training, the experience was so isolating. Becoming a patient in these settings where I was used to being the one to provide the care, to offer the services, it made me feel really lost. And for a while, for several years really, I didn't feel like I wanted to share these experiences widely. I didn't talk about them at work, of course, that's seen as unprofessional. I didn't even really talk about them with many of my friends. But as we started to get through the experiences and I did open up a little bit to some of the people around me, it was incredible how the stories from other people just poured out, and everybody had something they wanted to share about
Mm.
how their family life was complicated. These weren't all stories about early parenthood or pregnancy or fertility. These were just about life and relationships and health, like you said, and personal health and family health. And I just began to realize that without being overly simplistic about this, we could make something good of it. I'm not saying to be naive or everything that happens for a reason, none of that. I reject that idea. I feel like we make meaning out of things that happen. Intentionally, we make meaning. And so I wanted to find a way to preserve the kinds of stories that I was hearing from my patients and my friends and my coworkers and so many people who'd been through things we never talked about, you never see on the surface, right? So I approached individuals, it ended up being 21 other women, and asked them if they might want to work with me individually to tell their story and go through this collaborative process of interviews and writing together and prompts and collecting old journals and kind of distilling everything into the most compelling version of their story that we could create together. And that's how this book came to be.
That's so beautiful and touching, and I'm sorry for all of the losses and challenges
Oh,
you went
thanks for
through.
everybody. Thank you. On behalf of all of us, thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing how difficult it was for you as a physician to all of
Mhm.
the sudden feel lost because
Mhm.
you're the patient and not in
Right.
control.
And
And
surprising how difficult it was. That's why it was so difficult. It's that it was surprising it was difficult, which made it more difficult.
yeah, and I'm really with you because I know every time I go to the doctor's office, I feel out of control. Like, wait, this isn't my realm.
Right.
I can't make this person listen or see me or
Right.
and so yeah,
Uh,
it's I think it can being in any position where we're all of the sudden feel as if we're out of our
mhm.
area, and this is a key piece of the work that you do is helping people manage, understand when that discomfort is coming up, when
Mhm.
that anxiety and that sense is I really when this question came through, I thought of my own, like, back in maybe it was 6th grade.
Mhm.
No, it was before that. I think I was maybe 6 or 7 years old, where we were given an assignment at school of what we saw in our future. And I remember I'm not sure if I had kids, but I definitely had this brick house, and I had this little plan for my little life, and this is what was gonna happen. And my life has been extraordinarily different from what that
Mhm.
little tentative plan was. And I
Mhm.
think when we fight what life brings our way because we can't stop what life brings. We can't
Right.
stop the medical issues. We can't stop, in this case, the poor listener, now divorced from the partner, no kids
Mhm.
yet. I don't know about the dog, but all of those things, the car crash, the cancer. And when these things come our way, and we
Mhm.
all tend to have challenges of some degree in our lives, I know I've learned, I hope, to manage them with grace and a really
Mhm.
growth-oriented
Mhm.
attitude. It doesn't make them less challenging in a sense, but I think it does make us, as you said, and I love this piece of almost a tagline for you, is that
Mm.
it's that making meaning out of them,
Right.
making meaning out of what life brings our way. And I think that's where the story piece comes from. Sometimes people think making a story means like weaving a tale or telling a lie. No, no, no,
No.
no. It is making sense out
Mhm.
of how whatever came
Mhm.
can be used for growth,
Mhm.
enrichment, and we might not see it
Yeah.
when we're in the thick of things. What do you think?
Yes. It's finding the threads. That was a word you used earlier, the threads, and I think it is about the threads. It's about themes that recur in our lives. We don't always see them right away. We don't see those patterns or those relationships right away necessarily. It's only when we step back and try to tell our stories that we see those connections. And, you know, I think in relation to your listener's question, what's really interesting about that, and maybe this is part of where to get curious, where to use that idea of curiosity that I so value, maybe would help your listener. You know, there's a factor here that feels really important to me about time. What they're worried about is time, and how is time passing, and how are they spending their time, and how is it different from what they'd expected. I think that one way to get maybe a little bit of hope in the question, get at a little bit of hope, is that there's no way to rush it. As much as they may feel they want to, or they want to know what the outcome will be, right? No, we never really know. If even when we think we know, we don't. It's just an illusion for a little bit of time. And the reason I bring that up is I feel like all they can do in this moment is try to figure out what is the next right thing. And this is so much about small incremental steps. Now, I think this is something, we could really dig into in terms of imperfection too, because I'll say this book, people could look at it and say, "Oh, but how did you do all this and pull this together?" And people often ask that, and how did you make time for this in the midst of these other roles you have? And I have to point out, this book took more than 10 years from the idea to the publication. And that's not a coincidence. That's a matter of just using small bits of time and taking incremental steps that I knew were not perfect. I knew I would have loved to have had weeks to sit and write, go to retreats, sit on, just hours on end. And occasionally I got chunks of hours. Those are great. But a lot of this was just done in those in between moments, waiting for something else to happen, sitting somewhere at an appointment, biding my time. How could I use it to jot down some ideas on a notebook, right? So I think that for someone who's wondering where their life is going and it's looking like something really different from what they expected, how can they find some incremental changes, some small steps that will move them toward answering what's next? They don't have to know it all right away.
I really appreciate that you brought that up because I was thinking of a theme I've encountered in with
Yeah.
clients lately is the timeline anxiety.
Yes,
And you
yes.
really picked up that piece where for this individual, they have this dream. They haven't given up on the dream, it seems.
Right.
It's still there, maybe a bit dim, but
Mm,
but you really picked up on that piece about the passage of time. If I don't find that perfect person, that ideal partner that I thought I would have, they didn't use the word perfect, but at least
mhm.
that ideal
Yeah.
partner
That
that
imagined idea.
yeah,
Yes, yeah.
that imagined partner.
Yeah.
And I really think that's so important because when we realize, as you say, time has a life of its own. And
Mhm.
one of my favorite sayings is the one that says, "You've never been too old to be what you might have been."
Mm.
And I really think we need to, at every stage in life, remember, because I have people in their early 20s that I work with who have timeline anxiety. My friends have all done this and my friends have all done that, but I haven't. And so it's really about coming back to the self, not other people's timelines, and sometimes
Right.
not your own timeline, but then coming back to that place of, as you're saying, baby stepping, not giving up hope. It might mean revising your dream a little bit. Maybe
Mhm.
it's not two kids. Maybe it's two adopted children, or maybe it's being a mom in another way. We don't know.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean shutting the door on that, but it
Mhm.
does mean possibly doing things like having your eggs frozen, different strategies that you could take to still keep that hope alive,
Mhm.
and also realizing that our dreams don't need to be static. Our
Yes.
dreams are created by our being. We can shift them and change them. And sometimes
Mm.
when I think of what my life is today compared to what my dreams are, sure, I've been through terrible obstacle courses. I get that piece,
Mhm.
but oh my goodness, the things I've experienced and learned and done
Mm.
are vastly bigger than what I would have dreamed of.
Mhm.
Because sometimes our dreams can be too self-limiting.
Right, and so to that end, clearly the future that this person has been envisioning and has hoped for, that's an important part of who they are. That's one aspect, right?
Mhm.
But what else defines them? What else do they want beyond this idea of family life? And like you said, what are ways that even now, while they're in this messy middle, how can they define family, right? So that's one thing that the stories in Held Together, as I've collected and worked on them with people, really even more deeply prove to me that family can be anything you make it, right? I mean, people have their families biologically, through adoption, surrogacy, through community, and chosen family is every bit as important as biological. So I would challenge this person to say, while they are waiting in some ways, not passively, but while they're waiting for time to pass in any case, to see how some of these things they'd hoped for may unfold and come into their lives or not, what else can they do about the other parts of who they are? How can they find their people, find their communities, and be part of bigger families than this one nuclear hypothetical family that they imagine? Where is the rest of their family in the world? Maybe that will bring them some comfort.
Such a gorgeous, gorgeous point. And I also like how when the way you're phrasing it, because often when we're hopeless,
Mm.
sad, blue, depressed, whatever it might be,
Mhm.
we retract, we go more and more within, sometimes quite
Right.
literally, sometimes we stay indoors more. And as you're saying, if this individual begins to reimagine life
Mhm.
and create community,
Mhm.
go out, join, whether it's hiking groups, I know you like to hike, whether it's a reading group, whether it's an art group, whether you're volunteering, I
Mhm.
believe that when we become more expansive in our energy, and dare to do things that feel a little uncomfortable. And our
Mhm.
bodies might be saying, oh, that's bad, that's dangerous, when actually it's just a sign that it's uncomfortable. As long as it's a safe
Mhm.
situation, your body's just used to something different.
Right.
And sometimes that next step in the dream is hidden somewhere. Not that you're going out to meet that significant other there or to,
Mhm.
have the two children, but that sometimes just by making your life bigger and your heart bigger and more open, you make space
Yep.
for what life is going to bring you.
Mhm. And when you spend time in these circles with people who do things that you also care about, sure, you might meet a potential spouse. And if that's your goal, then fantastic if that happens and you'll have all these other things in common with them. but also just your people. You're going to meet other people who enrich your life because you share values and interests. And of course, great if some of that is local to you, but if you don't even live in a place with a large enough community for that to happen, these days there online has its benefits and drawbacks, but one of the amazing things is that people who feel like there's not really anyone near them that understands them or shares some really pivotal identity factors, with them. This is especially true for younger people. They can feel less alone. They can feel less detached because they can find their communities in some of these online spaces. And I'm the first person to admit I have this, conflicted relationship, love hate with social media and onlineness and all. But it really does allow us to build community beyond the limitations of our geography. And so that can be quite powerful.
Absolutely. And I believe I'm with you. I think that is what we do with our online communities. Do
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
become more expansive, create
Right.
more friendships, deeper friendships?
Right.
Or I've also seen them where people have gone, into doom scrolling and really
Right.
more
Sure.
isolated. So if I really hear you, if you're going, whether it's in person or online, if you're feeling something coming alive and it feels good and connective and
Mhm.
better, that's a green light. If you're
Right.
doing something where you're noticing that it's not a good fit, then that's a red
Yeah.
light. And
Whatever you're doing to build those genuine relationships, it's about that.
it
It doesn't
is.
matter in person or virtual, it's the genuine relationships that matter.
Thank you for highlighting that because I'm going to go back to a piece you were talking about. It is interesting
Yeah.
that in this particular person's question, there
Mhm.
is no mention of family. So not
Mhm.
that that's vital, but we don't know. Are they pretty
Mhm.
alone in the world? Do they have
Mhm.
family close by? Is their family very distant? And the reason I'm saying that is if there is an absence of family that feels close, I agree with you. Having a collected family, a soul
Mhm.
family, a found
Mhm.
family, whatever way you want to term
Yeah.
it, I think that that can be as good, if sometimes not a better fit
Mhm.
than a blood family. Because
Right.
sometimes, the families we were born into aren't a good fit in the long term. There isn't that deep connection or the
Mhm.
healthiness that is necessary for deeper, stronger connections.
Yeah.
So being able to use this as almost a pivotal point for assessing this. And it's really beautiful that you picked it up, this idea of community and family, that if it's not a launching pad for this dream, at
Mhm.
least it is a very important foundation for them to feel connected with.
Yeah, and, even if this listener does have close biological family, whether geographically close or emotionally close, I don't think that dismisses the huge benefits of chosen family, right? So people may be incredibly fortunate to have close, wonderful, actual, biological and adoptive, like nuclear families or, family house society conventionally defines it. That said, we should never expect any one relationship to give us everything. Even if we're in a happy partnership, if we have good relationship with kids or our parents, I think any relationship that resonates in the way that a good friendship does, it brings out something new in us. And there's no reason not to look for these ties with people who share something beyond happenstance, right? We should seek these out, and even if your listener of the question has amazing support already, they're moving into new questions in their lives. And when they can find people who help them reflect on those questions in a new way, in a different way, and figure out who they are now and who they want to keep becoming, that has value beyond the family that they may already know.
And I love how you said the piece of who I am now and who am I becoming?
Mm.
Because that's, really fits with how I see life. I
Mm.
see life as being an opportunity to continue to evolve, to continue to
Mhm.
evolve. And if we
Mhm.
have one static dream, and I'm not saying to discard that dream, but I also think it's important to have many dreams in life so that
Mhm.
if one isn't quite, you know, accessible right now, we still have, and this basically is what you're saying as well,
Mhm.
we have other dreams to breathe into.
And some of them we haven't even discovered yet. And these new relationships will help us tap into these things this potentials that we have, right?
I really appreciate that because it is a reminder of the important piece of continuing to evolve.
Mhm.
And this question reminds us, and this applies to all listeners, if you have had a hurdle in life and you have overcome that hurdle, as you likely have, most people have encountered many
Meaning you're
hurdles,
human. Yes, yes, you're
means you
human.
that is a sign of incredible strength, resilience, fortitude, because when I think of that obstacle course of life, right?
Mhm.
We all have various degrees of them. Some are more intense than others. Yet if we learn to assess them and say, wow, I made it through that. I made it through that. Oh, I made it through that. And this listener, the question tells us they made it through a divorce.
Mhm.
They made it through a cancer diagnosis. They made it through a car crash and the serious injuries that came. And those are just a few of the things they mentioned in that question.
Mhm.
And so I get this idea that this individual is very strong, determined, has fortitude, has
Mhm.
resilience. And so those are some of the things when they said, "Can you give me some hope?" Well, when you look at those qualities, there's a lot of hope in those qualities. If you are able to make it through all of those things
Mhm.
with or without the support of a community behind you,
Right.
that is really amazing. And I think so many times we forget, we know we went through challenges, but
Mhm.
we forget to reflect on, we remember how awful the
Right.
challenges were, but we forget to reflect on the gifts that we chose to
Mhm.
accrue along the way.
Yes, this ties back exactly into what you were saying about the tagline, this idea of making the meaning, right? I feel like we can, and maybe not just we can, we have to choose to make meaning even in the face of the unexpected, the imperfect, if you will, right? And this also ties into the idea, and I think this is an undercurrent through all of the stories in Held Together. Most of us in this book would not have chosen the challenges that we describe, but we can choose, and we choose together collectively to make a bigger meaning out of what has happened to us. And this really ties into not just being resilient, but being open to change and being receptive to experiences that have something to teach us or to offer us, but also, and this I think is really relevant to your listener, they draw on our own power to shape our stories and define our paths, even sometimes in opposition to what others are telling us is expected of us and for us. So, my question back to the listener is what you thought you wanted still exactly what you want? Maybe it is, but go out there to get these other experiences that might feel uncomfortable, as you said, and learn more about yourself because you're a really different person now from who you were when you formed this dream. Maybe it's still your dream, but the ways you're going to approach it now, at the very least, the ways have changed, and the attitude you may have toward it certainly will have changed.
I so appreciate that you highlighted that because it is a core piece of this that can be, sometimes we look at a dream and say, oh, I'm
Mhm.
a failure
Mm,
if I don't make that dream come true.
mm. Ugh,
And you put
yes.
it beautifully that sometimes that dream was great for a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old or a
Mm,
20-year-old or a 30 or
mhm,
whatever it is. But sometimes, and I think that's why I brought up my early, when I was a kiddo, I had a certain dream. Parts of it came true,
mhm.
parts didn't. But the point is that if we give ourselves permission to
Yeah.
look and reassess and say, is this the dream I want to breathe into now? Or
Mhm,
where I am. And it's not giving up on that old dream. It is giving yourself permission, if you
Mhm,
want,
mhm.
to replenish your life with a new dream, and it may be very
Mhm.
different.
I
It
like that
may be the same.
expression. I like that expression. Replenish your life with a new dream. And or at least with some modifications of the dream. Like, make sure that it's really, really in line with what you want now, and I love that. Give yourself permission to reconsider it. You might decide it's the same, you might not, but it's okay to question it.
Yes, and I also think another piece is that sometimes, and I found this to be true with generally all of my clients in some big or small way, that
Mm.
some challenge that life brought them, and I know this has certainly been true in my life,
Mhm.
that life presents you the challenge, you make it through it, you don't avoid it, and you're like, "Why
Mhm.
did life bring me this? I don't need another thing on my plate." And then later, with a backward glance, you're able to say, "Oh, I was able to use that
Yep.
class or that obstacle or that
Mhm.
encounter or that relationship to grow and learn. And if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't be as adept to face where I am
Right.
now." And so
Absolutely.
it's my follow the breadcrumb theory that if we learn like Hansel and Gretel did to follow those breadcrumbs
Mhm.
and, pick them, not necessarily pick them up, but follow them. And
Mhm.
then sometimes it really does lead us to a place that is a really different path than what we thought, but one that is
Mhm.
really growthful.
Mhm. That is exactly what I was thinking, and everything you've said, everything we've talked about up until here, it's about growth. I think that's why, these stories, the one we're talking about now, the stories you're referring to that everybody has, the stories that we've put together into Held Together, they may sound difficult, and a lot of them really are painful, difficult, truly challenging, but the stories are also fiercely optimistic. And I believe that's because watching people grow is the most inspiring thing, right? And it helps us as readers, as listeners to other stories, grow as individuals too. And I feel like that privilege to witness someone else's growth, that's really, I think, one of the most compelling things we can do in life. And that's your profession, my profession, that's our honor. And so to help this listener think about that for themselves and just to watch people around us in our chosen family, people who choose us and people that we choose to walk these stories alongside. Yeah, growth is really the most powerful thing we have as humans, really, at all stages of life.
I absolutely agree, and I think that's such an important piece of it because for any parent, any
Mm,
grandparent, any teacher, anybody who, as you say, medical practitioner, psychologist,
mhm,
whatever field you're in, even, bosses in work environments tend to, really love to watch their
mhm,
compatriots grow or watch your children grow. What
mm,
it's so rewarding in and of itself. And when we can turn that mirror on our own lives, and this
mhm,
is for, the anyone who's experiencing challenges. If you
mhm,
can learn to turn that mirror on yourself, and yes, growth is tough, growth can be painful, and to be
mhm,
able to say, but yes, I am creating meaning here. I'm
mhm,
choosing. And that's what you really highlight, that we don't necessarily create meaning when we're challenged. But that's
mhm,
really a skill that we must develop, is
mhm,
to learn
mhm,
to reflect and make meaning out of it, make helpful meaning out of it. Because
mhm.
sometimes we make meaning out of it in a negative way by saying this is all bad or
Right.
it's awful, or I hate that life brought me this, instead of saying, how am I learning? How am I growing? Can I find
Mm,
one nugget today
mhm,
to
right.
help me take that next step forward? Just one little piece.
Yeah, and that comes right back to the incremental steps, right? It's not everything at once. It's not a rushed timeline. It's what is that next right choice or action or idea that I can follow?
And it's so interesting that that's at least the second time you use that piece of the next right choice or next
Mhm.
right step. And I use that phrase in at least a couple of my books, where
Yeah,
sometimes that's all we
it's
need to
all you can do, and it's all you can do, and that's okay. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves to grow quickly and make meaning quickly, and I think that glosses over a lot of the nuance. We're not very good at nuance as a society,
not
and
vary at times.
no. And, yeah, I think that allowing ourselves maybe back again to giving ourselves permission, in this case, to take our time and as much as we're able, it's we feel rushed constantly in our culture. And if we can say, "All right," to ourselves, I know I'm gonna work my way through this and okay, but not today maybe, or just this little piece I can move forward. That's okay. It's okay. Not everything all at once.
Absolutely. And sometimes I believe that that next right step is sometimes as simple and as big as pausing
Mhm.
to say, I'm going to take a really deep breath here.
Mhm.
I'm going to give myself a minute. I'm going to write myself a love letter in my journal. Or maybe I'll
Mhm.
just write in my journal, right? And sometimes that next right step is simply not something that's that palpable. And I know in my own life, there are times where I just say, just right here, just be, just breathe.
Mhm.
And that can be enough
Mhm.
to reset our nervous systems, take the pressure off, because so much of the time we're putting the pressure on ourselves. And that's a key piece in this listener's question where there's a lot
Yeah.
of internal pressure. And I'm not judging that because as a recovering perfectionist, always recovering, there is a lot of internal pressure at times. And so by learning to breathe and just create space, you
Mhm.
can help let go of some of those pressures.
Yeah.
Ah, Dr. Thompson, what a glorious work of art you have brought to the world through your book and your
Oh, thank you so
presence.
much.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you.
Do you have any pieces, any additional tips you'd like to offer to our listeners?
Mm. I think growth is one of the biggest things that stands out from our conversation, but alongside that, I think it's these inspirations that stories can offer us about how others grow. They are so detailed and so specific, right? The stories in Held Together, the stories that we hear from our friends and family as we try to support them. But there are always universal threads. And the more specific we get about sharing our experiences, the more we can see this every woman quality of the things that we all go through. I think it's the curiosity about that, about the things that are more similar than different at the core of our stories that really leads us to genuine compassion, both for others and for ourselves. So if we can just, the more stories we have out in the world, I think the more patient we can all be with each other. So I hope that our stories from Held Together offer this to people and that everyone just feels like they at least have a few people in their lives that they can share these kinds of uncomfortable but ultimately powerful and optimistic stories with of growth and change.
Thank you. And I want just to add on, even though Held Together is more geared toward women and women's stories, I really want to add in it's a book that any gender can read and have incredible takeaways from for self understanding, for understanding people in your life, whether they're male or female,
Mhm.
because while people men and women do have different challenges in some ways, we are all so more alike than
Mhm.
we are different. And it is one of my dreams that hopes, dreams that men too can really learn because our ancestors had storytelling. And we're
Mhm.
not talking about, rode my mountain bike here and oh, you know, dug a ditch there and I did this there. Yes, those are lovely stories, but we're talking about stories where we're being vulnerable, we're going deeper, and we're going into that place of meaning. And
Mhm.
I'm a firm believer that the more people have, it's not a gendered issue, the
Mhm.
more we can all go deeper into the stories of who we are
Mhm.
and the stories and share those and invite other people to share their stories. That's when the judgment tends to evaporate a bit more and the connection tends to come in a lot more because again, we are all. So it's something I've learned so much
Oh,
over my work
thank you.
that when we peel back the layers that we've learned to develop and the defenses and the masks, inside, we're just humans. We're
Uh,
just these
Thank
imperfect.
you. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that perspective too, because while I agree with you, all the stories are people who identify as women and as mothers, but they're certainly not all biological mothers. And they're not even all truly, completely binary women considering themselves in that way.
Mm.
But some of the most incredible comments and reviews and things I've gotten have been everything from, a wide range of women and moms to several grandfathers in their 70s, 80s, and beyond who have just talked about how this really helped them understand their families more. And like you said, Jonathan, the human condition, right? It's some of the things that happen in the book only happen to women, but for the most part, these things are what happen to families. And families are of all genders and all backgrounds. And we can only benefit from listening to each other more closely and people with different perspectives from ours. So thank you for encouraging anybody to pick it up.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Thompson, thank you so much for your time, your energy, your warmth, and for bringing this beautiful book into the world to help knit people together. That's the
Thank
idea, to
you.
knit us together.
Thank you.
And so thank you again. I'm truly grateful.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you, as always, for joining us. It is such a privilege and a pleasure to be with you on this beautiful journey of life. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And, as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.